Hello and welcome to Policy Beast. On today's show, we have Yolanda Greaves. She is running for re-election for the Ashland Board of Selectmen for the 3-year seat. And she's also been on the Beast before, so I'd like to welcome you back, Yolanda.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. I look forward to our conversation.
Well, I hope to have a very wide-ranging talk tonight. And, you know, I think there's a lot of things that people would like to know about you and why you're running for re-election. But before we get into that, why don't we just do a little bit of the Board of Selectmen 101 again?
Okay.
So what is the Board of Selectmen? What's their function in the town?
So the main function of the Board of Selectmen is to set policy and procedure.
Okay.
And then we hire the town manager. That's our one hire, is the town manager. And he then, with the policy and procedures that we've created, goes and does the day-to-day operations.
Okay.
And he reports back to us, and we discuss with him as things come up. But we are not involved in any of the day-to-day. It's pure policy and procedure. So the police chief has to get hired, that's the town manager. The fire chief has to get hired, that's the town manager. And it's because based on our charter, we have a strong town manager position.
Okay. So when did you join the Board of Selectmen?
I joined the Board of Selectmen 3 years ago in May of 2012.
Okay. And what were your why did you initially jump into this? Did you feel compulsion to serve, or what made you put your hat in the ring?
So my first foray into town politics was as a school committee member.
Okay.
I had worked on the first school building project, and at that time, as I was working on that project, I had a number of people come up to me and say, you know, you'd be really good as a school committee member. So when the same election where the school building project lost by 28 votes, I was then elected to the school committee. I spent 5 years on the school committee, various roles. I finished as the chair, and I really enjoyed it. But when I left school committee, I felt for personal reasons and family reasons, I needed to step down and focus on family and different things. But I always stayed involved. I would go to town meeting. I knew people who were on the Board of Selectmen, people who were on the school committee. So I kept up to date with things that were going on. And then I started thinking, okay, I'd like to get involved back. I'd like to get back involved. I'd like to get on the Board of Selectmen. But I was involved with some other things. I'm also interested in dance. I was on the board of an organization called the Massachusetts Dance Festival, and I had made a commitment to them. So at first I wasn't going to run in 2012. And there was a lot of negative things going on in town. We were in the paper almost every week because of issues with the police department, things going between the selectmen and the town manager. And people started saying, if you're going to run, this is the year, because we could use your help. We could use your level-headedness. We could use your experience from school committee and town finance to come in and sort of help resolve some issues that were going on. So I officially talked it over with my family. Sure. So decided in January that I was going to run, and got a lot of support. A lot of people remembered me from my time on the school committee, and they supported me. They liked the work I had done, and they said, yes, it would be great to have, one, your experience from being on school committee, your involvement in town and volunteering in other ways, but also it would be good to have a woman on the board. We had a woman a number of years before, but she had then since stepped down. So with a lot of support and a lot of encouragement, I ran for the seat in 2012, knowing that there was a lot going on that I was going to need to understand quickly and take a look at. I won that election. I got the most votes that year. There were 5 people running for 2 seats, and I took the most votes, and here we are 3 years later. And why I'm running again, I feel like there's still things that I want to help with and work on moving forward.
I'm going to ask you more about some of those things in a minute. But before we do that, I want to ask that you are the chairwoman of the board. How does that happen? How does that work? do they just, please be chair?
Well, so what happens, we have a 5-member board.
Yes.
And after each election, either the meeting right after or the second or the first meeting in June, there's discussion amongst the members as to who would be best to lead the select board in the coming year. So I was elected in 2012, and Steve Mitchell became the chair that year. Then after leading into the second year, it was either myself or one other person who would have made the most sense to be the chair. And Steve Mitchell had done it for 1 year, and it was a very tough year, so he decided he didn't want to be chair again. One of our other members was an employee of the town, so we all agreed that it wouldn't be appropriate for him to be the chair because he'd have to recuse himself for different things as an employee, because as an employee, his direct or indirect boss would be the town manager.
I see.
So it was between myself and one other person, and a number of people in town came to me and said, it would be good if it were you. You're less of a lightning rod, you can bring people together, you have a way of listening to people and realizing that you can't make everyone happy, you at least try to get people to understand, and you can calm a situation down. So I became chair in May of 2013. That was when we brought on our town manager. He had joined us in the end of March. And we got through the whole police issue, brought on a new police chief, and things went pretty well that year. The next year, we had an election, and there was no change in the board in regards to who was sitting there. And it was decided that for continuity in working with the town manager and just other things, it would be best if I stayed chair for that year. So that's this year, and that's finishing up in May. And I would expect that when I'm reelected, I will not be the chair again.
Okay.
I'm ready to give it to the next person. The chair, it's interesting. People say to me, well, as chair, don't you have more power? I said, no. The only power I have is I get to run the meeting, and I work with the town manager to set the agenda for the meetings. But what's been nice is this past year we've been having the vice chair, Joe Magnani, has been sitting on the agenda planning sessions as well. So there's been two of us having that discussion with town manager Anthony Schiavi, discussing what needs to happen. And so it's been a really, I've enjoyed being chair, but I'm ready to, if I'm reelected, not be chair for a year and sort of get to sit back a little and support whoever does become chair.
But you're out.
But not have that responsibility, because it is. I mean, my vote is just the same as anyone else's vote, but it's the responsibility of running the meeting and setting the tone for the meeting.
Sure.
Which at times can be difficult, depending on what's going on. We saw it during the whole budget issue this past spring, when we had a number of people coming before us and upset about, the schools not getting the money that they wanted, and it's a matter of letting people know that they're being heard. And we can't always do exactly what they're asking us right then and there, but I personally always take it back, think about it, and then make decisions based on that.
Well, I'm glad you talked about the budget a little bit, because I want to segue into some of the issues that you said you wanted to help out, and some of the issues you care about, and I know the budget was definitely first and foremost on your mind. So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's just hit the issues right on.
Sure.
So talk to me about the budget process a little bit. Maybe some folks aren't familiar with how that all works in town initially, and then talk about this particular budget cycle and some of the issues that we've been facing as a town and some of your viewpoints on that.
Okay, so let's start with how the budget process works. So in the fall, the town manager works with our financial committee to create and draft a budget letter that talks about timelines and the expectations of each of the departments presenting their needs for the upcoming fiscal year budget. Now, realize this is October, and we're starting to ask them for what they think their fiscal requirements will be for the following July.
Okay.
So 9 months, 10 months ahead, they're having to budget and think about what initiatives they may want to do, if they're going to need personnel, what changes they may want to do. And on the general government side, Tony has put in place an objective-based budget. He has 8 goals and objectives, and each department has had to look at his goals and objectives, and if they're requesting new funds or if they have new initiatives that they want to do, they have to work within those 8 initiatives, those 8 goals and objectives that he has set forward for the town. So that starts in October. People start drafting their budgets, working with the departments. So the general government all reports to Tony, and then the school budget is the responsibility of Jim Adams, our superintendent, and the school committee.
Okay.
And they go through a similar process. They'll work with their departments and their schools and say, okay, they'll say these are what our needs are. So the schools work a little bit differently in that they're not working with an objective-based budget. I believe this year they did a zero-based budget. So starting at zero, build on your needs.
Right.
And I know Tony and Jim have been having discussions about how we, what we need to do moving forward as a town to make sure we're really showing people what we need. So in January, or end of January, we got a look at the school budget, and they had a 10% increase. Based on contractual agreements, some new positions that they need to do based on special education costs, some new out-of-district placement issues, things like that. So that's when the discussion started happening. So Jim Adams, the superintendent, put this information out to the town to let them know where the needs were. And they started having their discussions. We started as a town, as general government side, working with Tony and looking at his projected budget and what his needs were and where he thought he needed to make some changes and some of our contractual agreements. So, a lot of discussion back and forth between the general government side and the school side. And then we came to a somewhat very unique agreement in that we didn't want to just take money straight out of our stabilization fund. We've been doing that for many years. And it's a one-time budget hit. So you take the money out of stabilization, you put it in your budget, and that money is then gone out of the stabilization fund. And you can't then rely on that the next fiscal year unless you take the same amount of money out of your stabilization fund.
Okay.
Okay. So in looking at the school budget, it was decided, and through some work by our assistant town manager, Michael Herbert, and town manager and Jim Adams, and I think Barbara Durand, our assistant superintendent, they came up with an idea of creating a new stabilization fund for special education costs.
Okay.
So you'd still be moving money out of our main stabilization fund, but it'd be going to another stabilization fund. And all of this still needs to get voted at town meeting.
I was about to say, this isn't in place yet.
So this is not in place. This is related to the fiscal 2016 budget, and this will be something town meeting will have to vote on. So they'll have to vote the creation of this new stabilization fund. It will only be able to use for special ed costs, special education costs.
All right.
And then they'll vote to put money into that stabilization fund as part of the whole budget process and discussion at town meeting. And then if the schools find that they need to use these funds, if they, next year they're going through their budget and they say, okay, we need to pull from that stabilization fund, they will come to town meeting next May and ask to pull money from that stabilization fund. So that was one of the ways we resolved our fiscal 16 budget crisis. And I call it a crisis because there's a lot of needs at the schools, and people were wanting us to try to do an operational override for this year. And I don't think there was enough information, and there wouldn't have been enough time to educate the people and give them enough information to make an educated decision as to whether or not that was the right thing.
So a couple things you mentioned.
Sure.
So going back to the Special Education Stabilization Fund, that's not written in stone. That has to go to town meeting. What happens
Correct.
if that goes to town meeting and it's not passed? What
Well,
occurs? What occurs if that happens?
Well, if that does not happen, if the vote does not go to say, yes, we want to create this new stabilization fund, I see one of two things. We'll definitely have to adjust the budget on town meeting floor, and it will either be take the money out of stabilization and just put it to the bottom line budget, or it'll be you don't have that money available.
Okay.
And then Tony and Jim would have to work together to figure out how to cover that loss of revenue, really.
Okay. And you did mention operational override. Now, to my knowledge, we have never had.
Ashland has never
an
passed an operational
Operational
override.
override, okay.
We tried, since I've been in town, we've tried once.
Oh, and before we get too
Okay.
in the weeds, let's talk about the different kinds of overrides a little bit.
Sure.
So I don't want to go
Yep.
down this path.
So
without-
an operational override means you are adding money to your operating budget, and it's there forever. So currently we're allowed to increase our tax levy by 2.5% every year. And here in Ashland, we usually do the full 2.5% because of contractual agreements and increase in costs and health insurance. We need that full amount.
Sure.
So an operational override would say, okay, we're going to add an extra 0.5%. So instead of doing 2.5%, we would do 3% or 3.5%, depending on what the needs are. So you would vote that and you would see that moving forward. Then there's something called a debt exclusion override. Those we've passed many of because as a town we've seen the sort of seen the light that if you want to build things, that is the way to do it. So we've done debt exclusion overrides for the library, for the town hall, for the community/senior center, for the high school. Those are the recent ones, and I think there was an operational override back in the mid-90s, mid to late 90s, when they did an addition to the current middle school, and it was then making it a junior/senior high school, and they did some additions to the Warren School. So typically, debt exclusion is for construction.
Construction.
And we've used it, for almost every town building that we've done, we've used the debt exclusion, which if we decide to move forward, which I know one of the things, the other we're going to talk about is one of the, what are the things that I would like to be involved with if I am reelected.
Sure.
We would need to look at a public safety building.
Okay.
And that has been talked about a lot here in town, and it's getting to be time where we really need to start doing some planning for that because our debt, our excluded debt that we've used for the high school, the town hall, that number's starting to go down. So it would be good to, from a financial planning standpoint, okay, instead of just letting it die all the way, which I think is still 10 years out, is you try to keep it level so you bring in a new project to keep that debt excluded amount level to be able to do other projects.
Now, going back to the operational override piece, there were a lot of folks who were calling for that on this cycle.
We had a lot of people
for or
saying,
against that? Like, what were some of your concerns around that? What did you end up eventually inviting
so
folks to do?
we have what we call them tri-board meetings. So it's all the members of the Board of Selectmen, all the members of the Finance Committee, all the members of the School Committee, plus the two town manager and assistant town manager, and superintendent and assistant superintendent. And it's in those meetings that we were able to bring about this budget, this 2016 budget. We've been doing tri-board meetings for a number of years, and there was some real collaboration this time between the three boards, between Dan Conroy, the chair of the FinCom, Lori Tosti, the chair of the School Committee, and myself. We really felt this was a good way to have this discussion. It was decided, though, that for this year, because of the stabilization fund issue and using that and just looking at the needs, we were able to say, you know what, this is not the year to do an operational override. We found a way. We're still not whole. I mean, there are still things that are not going to be happening in the schools and on the general government side. There are positions that may not get filled. New initiatives that people might have wanted to do to improve what's going on in town will not happen because we're not doing the override. But it was decided that that's a big word, operational override, and it's a big decision. And we need to make sure that before we go that route, that we have a true discussion with the citizens, but also that we can show that we are using every tax dollar that we currently get to its fullest, and that there is limited waste and limited use of money I mean, we need to make sure that we show that we are using every tax dollar to the best that we can before we ask for more. So that's part of what has to happen, and there was no way to do that between now and May, when we started having these discussions in February and March. So moving forward, and there's already a tri-board meeting scheduled for June 8th, which will be after the elections and after all the boards have their reorganization meetings and sessions.
Right.
And that's the next time that the three boards will come together to say, okay, what do we need to do? And how can we work with the public to find out if this is what they really want? Because it's not, I mean, yes, the Board of Selectmen are the one who decide to put it on a ballot and bring it to town meeting. But it's a true community discussion. It's not, we can't just hear from one small group. We have to make sure that we talk to everyone, because everyone in town will be impacted. Hopefully they'll be impacted in a positive way in regards to better services, some increased services. But we will all, if this were to happen, our tax dollars, our tax bills would go up. So one of the things for me is, if this is the way we go, I've already talked to town management, and we need to find a way that it doesn't impact people who maybe can't afford it. You know, people who are on fixed incomes. So it's not just a one thing decision. There's a lot of parts and a lot of moving pieces in regards to whether or not this is the right thing for Ashland.
Speaking about other things that you feel may be the right thing for Ashland, you talked a little bit about the public safety building issue.
Yep.
Let's talk about that a little bit. So you're
Sure.
primarily concerned about physical plant. What's the current situation, and what are your concerns
Our
about
current police building was built sometime in the 70s. I don't have the exact date.
it? Okay.
When there were no female officers. They were all male officers. And town wasn't as big. There wasn't as much going on. The police probably were not as busy as they are now. So in our current facility, there's a trailer in the back for the female officers. We just within the last year moved our administrative staff, so our chief and his 2 lieutenants and his assistant, into a separate space so that they could have privacy, they could have security for their records, and just so our police department, they're doing, I mean, the thing that's always hard is we have a very good police department, and they're doing a great job, but the facilities that they're in are not up to 21st century needs. And I mean, we just made some changes. There were some glass that wasn't bulletproof. There were computer issues that if someone was working on a computer that needed privacy, they didn't have that.
Okay.
So it was a building designed for a smaller community, and we're a much larger community. We have a bigger police department. I don't know exactly how many more officers we have, but I know we have more officers. And the same with our fire department. You know, people look, oh, what a nice, quaint old fire building.
Right.
Well, our fire department personnel don't sleep there in the downtown building.
I was about to say, because they're two.
They sleep, right. So we have the smaller firehouse downtown, and then we have the more modern one over on Cedar Street.
Right.
And the one on Cedar Street, that's where they sleep, but they had to split it up again, because when we went from just male personnel to female personnel as well, they had to create sleeping areas for them so that, you know, people can sleep comfortably and have privacy. And, you know, that building isn't as old, and I would think that even if we do public safety building, I would think we might keep that Cedar Street building just to have fire apparatus on that side of town. But that's all part of the discussion. But also, if we do some kind of new public safety building, we'd bring our police and fire together.
Okay.
So their collaboration would improve. And by having a newer, bigger building, there's a possibility then of regional collaboration, whether it be for dispatch or we're not sure what.
Okay.
But by having a space that's more modern and open to new things, you could possibly increase some revenue.
Okay. Well, in the time that we have left, and we don't have a lot of it, but I want to make sure that we cover this. You know, you've talked a lot about some of the issues you've tackled with while you've been on the board. You know, talk a little bit about some of the accomplishments that you're most proud of that, you know, during your service, and let folks know what.
Sure.
About
And
that.
what's interesting, I was talking to someone else about this, and everything you do on the Board of Selectmen, a lot of it is as a team. You know, it's not one person making a decision. So one of the big things that we did was bring on town manager Anthony Schiavi. He came from a different background, but he came in and he hit the ground running, and he has been learning and proving himself every day. He thinks outside of the box. He really looks for new initiatives and is a very strong leader for the town employees. And that's been a really, I feel very good about that accomplishment. With his help, and we've put in place some new financial policies for the town. We have a financial reserve policy, we have our new capital improvement policy, and there's one more, and I keep forgetting what it is. But there are these different policies then. So one of the good things is, so now when we have our free cash after our funds get approved, when we go to November town meeting, we know what we're going to do with that free cash. What percentages is going to go into our stabilization fund, what is going to go to our OPEB, which is our other post-employment benefits, and what is going to go to capital. So once we meet our 10%, so the reserve policy says, okay, once we have 10% in our stabilization fund, we can increase the percentage to some of these other things. And the other thing that I haven't talked about this too much is, when I was on school committee, we always did something called the State of the Schools. In January, we invite people and we do a big presentation about what's going on in the schools, and there'd be pictures. So once Tony came on board, and I said, you know, it would be really cool to do a State of the Town. You have the State of the State, you have the State of the Nation. Let's do a State of the Town address. So we tried doing it last year in 14, and because of different things, it didn't work out. But we had our first one this year. It was the State of the Town address. It was combined general government and schools, both did about a 20, 25-minute presentation. And then myself and Lori Tosti, our school committee chair, and Dan Conroy, our finance committee chair, we each spoke about 5 minutes. And it really was a chance to celebrate all that is good in Ashland. And even though we talk about financial difficulties and problems, and we actually have a very good town. We have so many great volunteers. And to be able to bring people together, we had almost 200 people come for this first State of the Town address. And to know that, you know, with myself and Tony, you know, and the support of the board, we were able to bring that together and bring the community together. And the other accomplishment that I feel like I've really spearheaded is the last 2 summers, members of the Board of Selectmen have been at the farmers market on Saturday. The first summer that we did it, so this will be our 3rd summer. So 3 summers ago, we have a tent, and it's called the Town Tent. and I made sure that first summer that at least 1 or 2 members of the Board of Selectmen was at the farmers market every Saturday, just to get feedback. And we got all kinds of feedback that first summer. And people said, oh, that's really cool that you guys are there. So last summer, as we were preparing for it, I said, wait a minute, let's get other members, other volunteer committees and boards to come and be part of this. So I reached out to every committee in town, and we had school committee members come, we had FinCom, we had planning board, and there's so many committees that I know I'm going to forget a few, but at least once through the summer, a member of every board was at the farmers market, meeting with people, answering questions, and people really responded to it. And the committees seemed to enjoy it because they were getting their information out. So those are some of the things I'm pretty proud about for my first term.
Fantastic. As we make our final approach,
okay,
I will ask you the question that I've been asking many of the candidates for this position. If someone were to say, you know, give me one reason to vote for Yolanda Graves, what would it be?
Experience and consistency. So I've been on the board for the last 3 years, so I can bring that experience forward to another term of 3 years. Plus having some consistency from one board to another. Because as I was explaining to someone, if I'm not reelected, we will have 3 basically brand new Board of Selectmen members moving forward, because you'd only have 2 remaining. And I know Rob Scherer, one of my opponents, has been on the board before, but it's been a while, and this is a very different town from when he first ran and first was on the board. So I think my experience of the last 3 years and having that consistency, and you know, I don't always talk about this, but having a female perspective. When I walk into a meeting, I think there's a different feel to a meeting than if it's just all men. And I think it's important as a town that we have representation from both sides, male and female, sitting on the Board of Selectmen.
And there you have it. Yolanda, thank you so much for coming on the show.
You're very welcome.
Our guest for this episode of Policy Beast has been Yolanda Greaves. She's running for the 3-year seat on the Board of Selectmen. Election day in Ashland is May 19th, so make sure you get out and vote. Thanks so much for joining us for Policy Beast. I'm Makita Keegan. Take care.